So I'll let you in on a little secret of mine. I really dig the whole process of deploying servers. Desktops too, but the whole idea of automated deployment for servers and desktops is something that for me is one of the most exciting things I think you can do in our IT industry. There's just something to be said for taking an empty, lifeless piece of hardware and with a couple of keystrokes or a couple of mouse clicks, or even just by turning it on, having it automatically install and become a full of life, fully functional server that can perform some workload. That process, with the right tools, is a sight to behold. And it's honestly something that can separate you from a lot of other people that make up the IT industry. Having success in deploying servers and doing so in an automated fashion is something that, well, is not really commonly known because it's a bit of an art form. Well, here in this first course for the 70-411 exam, we're going to talk about the deployment of servers, as well as the management of those servers once you finish that initial installation. And if you were with me back in the 70-410 course that I put together just before this one, you may have saw how the deployment and management topics were they were really sort of half there. Well, the 7410 and the 7411, as I think I'd mentioned before, are kind of two shades of what are really the same content. And so it's here in this course that we go through what is effectively a part two of a course with a similar sounding name back in that initial 70-410 exam. Now, if you're just joining us, this is the second of our series of 7 courses in Pluralsight's learning path for the 70-411. We began with a quick introduction of the MCSA and the 70-411 exam. We're talking here about the R2 version of all the content for Windows Server 2012 R2. And it's here in what is really our very first course of actual content that we'll go through the steps in deploying, managing, and maintaining servers. Now, curiously, that deployment topic, even though it kind of was my introduction, is really only the first of the 3 different objectives that make up this functional group. In our first objective and first module, we'll talk about deploying and managing server images. And what we're really discussing here is how you can bring to bear Windows deployment services as a mechanism to bring greater automation to the deployment of the Windows OS. We'll also talk about some kind of really cool things you can do with automatically adding in packages and patches and updates into those server images without having to deploy them, update them, and then recapture them once again. Microsoft has some really awesome tools that you can use in order to do this that treat those image files kind of like a little zip file or virtual hard disk file that you can break into and make changes without having to boot the machine. With that deployment topic firmly entrenched in our minds, we'll then shift gears to talk about patch management, which is also actually kind of a cool thing to do as well, because patch management these days is a far easier task than what it used to be a generation ago. Now, by no means is patch management not a tedious task. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different updates you have to worry about. But Microsoft's WSUS solution, the one we'll be talking about here in this second module, really improves the ways in which you go about getting patches aligned with the machines that require them. And then once we understand how to do patch management on those machines that we've deployed, we'll shift into a third topic here on monitoring of servers. And it's this third one that there are a lot of tools that you've probably already seen before. You've seen Task Manager. You've probably peeked through Resource Monitor and perfmon. You've probably seen the event log before. But there are some ways in which we'll talk about here in this third and final module at Objective about how you can use these tools in the server world to do some really cool things for monitoring the performance and the activities of what's going on under the covers of those Windows servers you're charged with managing. So let's get this 70-411 learning path kicked off here with this, our very first functional group and course on deploying and managing servers. Coming up next, we will begin with that whole discussion on how to bring greater automation to the deployment task when you're creating fully functional servers out of otherwise lifeless equipment. We'll talk about the installation of the Windows Deployment Services role. We'll configure and manage some boot, some install, and even some discover images. We'll talk about how to add in drivers automatically during the initial installation, how to update those images, and how even to install some features in those offline images so that you can keep your images up to date without having to actually deploy them. This conversation and much more is the topic for our next module coming up.